This changes everything, mate. Literally 1 minute ago inside the House of Commons, Nigel Farage just pulled off what Westminster insiders are already calling the most savage political ambush in modern British history. And what kicked off right after has rattled Westminster to its very core. You can still feel the tremors. As I'm talking to you now, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister who bangs on about transparency and integrity, looked absolutely rattled at the dispatch box. His hands were shaking as he clutched his notes, eyes darting around like a bloke who knows he's been caught banged to rights. The footage, and trust me, you've got to see it, shows a leader fully exposed, cornered in front of the whole nation, with nowhere to leg it and no clever spin that could possibly bail him out. But before we get into the juicy details of what Farage actually dropped, you need to clock something crucial about what built up to this moment. Because this wasn't some off-the-cuff Commons Barney, this was cold, calculated and timed down to the second. According to 3 separate sources I've spoken with in the past half hour, Farage has been sitting on this bombshell for weeks, just waiting for the perfect time to drop it. A senior Reform UK insider told me not even 40 minutes ago, and I quote, Nigel knew exactly when to strike. He waited until Starmer was wobbly, until the polls showed the cracks forming, then went straight for the jugular. His exact words, the jugular. And after what we've witnessed today, that's no exaggeration. This is political warfare, proper brutal stuff, and the fallout's piling up by the hour. Here's what actually went down in that chamber around 2:15 this afternoon. Prime Minister's questions was already lively. Labour's backbenchers were fidgeting, still bruised from last week's catastrophic immigration stats, showing a 23% rise in small boat crossings compared to last year. The Tories were circling like sharks that smelled blood. Then up stands Nigel Farage. The entire Commons froze. You could have heard a pin drop. MPs stopped rustling papers. Side chats died out. Even the Speaker leaned forward because everyone in that room knew. When Farage gets that look in his eye, someone's political career is about to get torched. Farage started calm. Too calm. He started off polite enough, thanked the Prime Minister for taking his question, did the usual polite Commons routine. But then the tone flipped. His voice dropped a notch, deadly calm, and what came next made every single MP in that chamber sit bolt upright. Mr. Speaker, Farage began, I've got in my possession documents leaked to me by a whistleblower deep inside this government, and they reveal a level of deception so staggering, so calculated, it makes the expenses scandal look like a dodgy parking ticket. The reaction was instant chaos. Labour MPs kicked off, shouting across the benches. Tory MPs were trying to hide smirks behind their papers. The Speaker was hammering his gavel, yelling for order. But Farage wasn't even close to finished, not by a long shot. Here's where it goes absolutely nuclear. According to these leaked files, and I've spoken with 2 journalists who've seen redacted copies and swear they're legit, Number 10 has been secretly running a WhatsApp group with select cabinet ministers, deliberately coordinating talking points to cover up the real cost of the government's so-called green energy transition. And we're not talking about small fry discrepancies here. This was a full-blown stitch-up, a deliberate effort to downplay how much ordinary working Brits are going to get clobbered over the next 5 years. One leaked message, allegedly from a senior cabinet minister, whose name I can't mention for legal reasons, literally says, "We absolutely cannot let these figures go public before the locals. Bury them in the appendix of the infrastructure report. No journo ever reads that. But hold on to your hat because it gets even darker." Farage then pulled out, and this has been verified by 4 separate political reporters in the chamber, what he claimed was the actual breakdown of projected costs. Not the polished fairy tale numbers the government's been spoon-feeding Parliament and the press, the real deal, and they're jaw-dropping. According to Farage's document, which he's now plastered all over social media, already racking up more than 2 million views in under an hour, the true average household energy bill isn't set to rise by $400, as the government's been claiming, but by $780. Nearly double, that's the difference, between families keeping warm this winter or facing the brutal heat or eat dilemma. That's becoming all too common across the UK. And Starmer's reaction? Absolute car crash. He stood there at the dispatch box, flustered, papers flying everywhere, fumbling through his notes like a man who knew the game was up. His comms director, sat up in the gallery, was bashing her phone like her life depended on it. Every political analyst I've spoken with in the last half hour has said the same thing. They've never seen Starmer look this rattled, This unprepared, this cornered, he tried to brush it off, called Farage's claims misleading, and taken out of context, classics. Political waffle when you've been caught bang to rights, and everyone in that chamber knew it. But then Farage cut in with a point of order, and what he said next sent the whole House into absolute chaos, Mr. Speaker, he began. If I'm misleading this House, then perhaps the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero can explain why she's deleted her official WhatsApp account in the last 45 minutes. Let that sink in. 45 minutes. Which means, going by the timeline, she wiped that account mere moments after Farage started his assault. The implications are massive. If these messages are all fake, if this is just some elaborate stunt, as Starmer wants us to believe, then why on earth would a Cabinet Secretary nuke the very evidence that could clear her name? Unless, of course, she's not out to prove her innocence. She's scrambling to bury her guilt, and right on cue, the mainstream media mob kicked into gear. The establishment press are already trying to spin this as just another Farage publicity stunt, more theatrics from the man they wrote off years ago as a political relic, the Kerr. Guardian dropped a piece barely, 17 minutes ago, calling the allegations unfounded conspiracy theories. The BBC's political editor has tweeted that we should wait for independent verification before jumping to conclusions. But here's the bit they're conveniently brushing under the rug. The whistleblower who leaked this stuff to Farage isn't some bitter ex-staffer or political hack with an axe to grind. They're a senior civil servant with 23 years of spotless service. This is someone who's worked under 5 governments, both Labour and Conservative, and served the British state with distinction. According to their anonymous statement, they'd simply had enough. They described this scandal as, quote, the most cynical manipulation of public information I've ever witnessed in my entire career. And here's where the whole story takes a proper dark turn, so listen closely. Within minutes of Farage dropping his bombshell, the government's Rapid Rebuttal Unit, yes, that's a real department, went into overdrive. 3 separate fact-checking organisations, all conveniently funded, directly or indirectly, through government-linked channels, pushed out articles at the same time, questioning the authenticity of Farage's documents. The coordination was so blatant, so on the nose, that even veteran journalists were whispering about it. One senior BBC hack, speaking off the record in a chat that later got leaked, said, I've covered Westminster for 3 decades, and I've never seen the establishment circle the wagons this fast. If there was nothing to hide, they wouldn't be this desperate to kill the story. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? The British public aren't mugs anymore. They've been spun one too many times. They've seen immigration numbers quietly revised months after elections. They've watched NHS, waiting times magically improve in official reports while getting worse in reality. They've been sold fairy tales about lockdowns that were temporary, but left us drowning in debt for generations. And now they're being told these leaked documents, showing an organised government cover-up of energy costs, are somehow fake. Come off it, especially when a cabinet minister's deleting evidence and Downing Street's comms teams are going into full-blown meltdown. The panic is showing. Social media right now is absolutely blowing up. 6 of the top 10 trending topics in the UK are directly tied to this story. The hashtag #Starmer scandal has already been used over 140,000 times in the past 90 minutes. And what are they hiding is pushing 80,000 mentions and climbing by the second. And here's the most telling part. These aren't activists or party diehards making noise online. These are ordinary Brits, people battered by the cost of living crisis, sharing their own stories under those hashtags. Real people finally saying, enough's enough. A Nan from Stoke-on-Trent posted online saying she's already choosing between heating her home and paying for her prescription meds. A young dad from Glasgow said he's had to pick up a second job just to keep up with energy bills that have already doubled. And a retired teacher from Somerset shared that she's wearing 3 jumpers indoors just to avoid switching the heating on. These are real people, living through real consequences, while their government plays word games and buries the truth. Now, Starmer's defenders will say this is being blown out of proportion, that every government has to manage sensitive information, that the green energy transition is complicated, and that communication must be handled carefully, and to be fair, they've got a point. Governing's not easy. Big economic transitions always create winners and losers. You do need clear messaging to explain the hard stuff, but here's the line between careful communication and calculated deceit. Careful messaging means you're honest. You tell people the difficult truths, but you explain them clearly. Calculated deception? That's when you deliberately hide those truths, because you know that if the public actually saw the real cost, the real impact, the real burden they'd carry, they'd never have voted for you. That's not governance. That's a con. Straight up political fraud. Now, here's the context the mainstream press won't touch, because it completely wrecks their cosy, partisan politics as usual narrative. 6 months ago, before the general election, Labour's manifesto proudly promised that its green energy plan would create hundreds of thousands of jobs, cut household bills within 2 years, and turn Britain into a clean energy superpower. Those weren't throwaway soundbites. Those were printed black and white promises, pushed through every letterbox in the country, and sold as serious, costed pledges backed by solid economics. Fast forward to today, and we're finding out that ministers knew for months, maybe even before that manifesto hit the printers, that the real costs would be nearly double what they told voters. Let's call it what it is. If you do that in the private sector, it's fraud. In Westminster, apparently it's just called strategic communications, but it gets darker, because now, insiders at the Department for Energy Security and Net, Zero are coming forward, emboldened by the whistleblower with fresh allegations. They claim that on at least 7 separate occasions over the past 4 months, civil servants produced briefing papers showing the true cost projections, only for those documents to be sent back with orders to revise the assumptions and present a more optimistic scenario. Inti? Plain English, they were told to cook the books, to massage the data, to make it look prettier than it was, and when some of those civil servants raised concerns through proper channels, they were quietly shuffled off to other departments or told their concerns had been noted and addressed. That's Whitehall speak for. Keep your head down and do as you're told. Now the opposition parties smell blood. The Tories, who an hour ago were busy squabbling among themselves, are suddenly united behind their leader, demanding an immediate independent inquiry. The Lib Dems, normally the calm ones in the room, have gone full throttle, calling for the Energy Secretary to resign immediately, and even some Labour backbenchers, especially those from old working class constituencies hit hardest by energy costs, are quietly losing patience. One Northern Labour MP told a journalist off the record, "If this is true, if we've been systematically lying about the cost, then we deserve whatever's coming. I didn't get into politics to lie to the people I represent. And that brings us to now, where the next 72 hours could decide the very survival of this government. Because once public trust cracks, especially over people's heating, bills, and livelihoods, it's almost impossible to glue back together." Farage has just announced he'll be holding a press conference tomorrow morning at 9 a.m, where he's promising to drop even more documents, ones he says will expose the full scale of the cover-up, stretching across multiple government departments. And this time, it's not just about energy costs. He's hinting at a much bigger picture, a pattern of deceit running far wider and deeper than anyone first imagined. Now, the government's got 3 choices. Option 1, try to discredit Farage, paint the whole thing as yet another conspiracy theory. That's their current play, but it's getting shakier by the hour as more evidence piles up. Option 2, launch a so-called independent inquiry, keep a tight leash on it, control the terms, and drag it out until the public moves on. Or option 3, come clean. Admit the lies, apologise to the British people, face the music with whatever dignity they can scrape together. But let's be honest, we all know how this game works. When modern governments face existential threats to their credibility, they almost always pick option 2. A polished, slow-motion transparency exercise that's really just a pressure valve, designed to let the public vent over months while nothing truly changes. Only this time, that trick might not fly. The British public are knackered. They're done with inquiries that drag on for years and churn out 400-page reports no one ever reads. They're sick to the back teeth of politicians who apologise for communication errors while dodging responsibility for the chaos they caused. They've had it with a Westminster elite that plays by its own rules. where lying to millions of people lands. A few tough interviews, not the sack, and here's the bit that's got insiders at number 10 absolutely bricking it. In the last hour, I've spoken to several Westminster sources who say more whistleblowers are gearing up to come forward. At least 3. From completely different departments, one source with close Treasury links claims the government's official unemployment. Stats have been quietly fiddled, reclassifying. Who counts as actively seeking work, to make job numbers look healthier than they are. Another insider at the Home Office says ministers were explicitly warned that the Rwanda deportation plan was legally unworkable, but pushed it through anyway because admitting failure would have been political suicide. And a third source, whose department I can't name without outing them, alleges that major infrastructure projects were green-lit with deliberately optimistic impact assessments. Civil servants, they claim, were told to lowball costs just to get the funding approved, knowing full well those numbers would explode once construction started. If even one of those new allegations turns out to be true, we're not looking at a one-off blunder. We're looking at a culture of deceit, a system built on spin, manipulation, and cooked-up stats. We're watching dishonesty become policy, and that should terrify every single person in this country, no matter where you sit politically. Because when lying stops being the exception, that ends careers and starts being the rule that protects them, that's when democracy starts to rot. You can't have government by consent if that consent's been engineered through fake data. You can't have accountability if the facts that underpin it are falsified. And you can't have a functioning democracy when the bond between the governed and the governors is built on lies. And here's the kicker, the economic fallout of all this is only just beginning to hit home. If energy bills are set to jump by €780 instead of €400, that's an extra $380 our families never budgeted for. For a single mum working 2 part-time jobs, that's the brutal choice between keeping her kids warm or putting proper clothes on their backs. That's not politics. That's people's lives. For an elderly couple living off a fixed pension, this could mean cutting back on meals or skipping the social clubs that keep them sane and connected. For a young family already hanging by a thread with mortgage rates that have tripled in 2 years, it could be the difference between keeping their heads above water and going completely under. These aren't faceless statistics. These are real people paying the price for political deception, and let's be honest, the people behind these decisions won't feel a thing. They're cushioned by ministerial salaries, taxpayer-funded perks, and expense accounts big enough to buy a small car every year. While working families tighten their belts, Westminster's still dining out on the taxpayer's tab. Now, let's deal with the line already being pushed by government loyalists and the media class, the same crowd that jumps to defend the establishment every time there's a whiff of scandal. They're saying Farage is fear-mongering, that he's dumbing down complex policy into headline-grabbing soundbites, that he's stoking outrage rather than offering solutions, and sure, there's a sliver of truth in that. Farage knows exactly what he's doing. He's timed this perfectly, chosen his words like a scalpel, and gone for maximum political damage. But here's the real kicker. If the government had been straight with the public from day one, would Farage even have the ammo to fire? The problem isn't that Farage is exploiting the chaos. The problem is the chaos exists because the government built it, brick by brick, on half-truths and spin. And while Westminster scrambles to contain the fallout, the international ripples are already starting. Britain's green energy transition has been sold to the world as the gold standard, proof you can go green without tanking your economy. Other nations have been watching closely, considering whether to follow Britain's lead. But if it turns out that the UK government has been fudging the figures, inflating results and downplaying costs, then this isn't just a domestic scandal. It's a global humiliation. You can't brag about being a climate leader when your data's dodgy and your numbers don't add up. Foreign investors who are ready to pour billions into British green energy projects are now thinking twice. International partners are wondering if UK commitments are worth the paper they're printed on. This isn't just about Labour's credibility. This hits Britain's global reputation square in the face. Because what we're witnessing right now, in real time, could be the collapse of a government's moral authority, barely months after taking power, and that's not hyperbole. Governments can weather recessions. They can recover from policy blunders. They can even bounce back from small scandals. But what they cannot survive is the growing belief that they don't tell the truth, that the truth for them is optional. That voters aren't citizens, just problems to be managed through spin and manipulation. Once people stop believing their leaders are honest, the social contract holding democracy together starts to unravel. We've seen this movie before. The MP's expenses scandal gutted public trust and destroyed political careers overnight. Partygate shattered what little moral credibility remained and took down Boris Johnson. And now, we might be seeing it again, what some are already calling Starmergate or Star Malik's. Take your pick. Except this time, the deceit isn't about boozy lockdown parties or dodgy claims for duck houses. This time it's about systematic lying on policies that affect millions of ordinary Britons, their bills, their jobs, their futures. Even the betting markets are starting to smell blood. In the last 2 hours, odds on Labour losing its parliamentary majority have tightened from 12-1 to 5-1, and the odds on Keir Starmer, being replaced as Labour leader before the next election, have crashed from 20-1 down to 8-1. That's not just political noise. That's the market signalling a government in freefall. These aren't casual punters chucking a fiver on for a laugh. These are serious political analysts and institutional investors, the kind who move real money, staking huge sums on where this crisis is heading, and their collective judgment that this government is in deep trouble. We're talking about an existential threat that could reshape the entire British political landscape for the next decade. Whether they're right or wrong, we'll find out soon enough. But the fact that these market tremors are happening this fast tells you everything you need to know about how seismic this moment really is. Because what's unfolding right now isn't just another Westminster scandal. It's a generational reckoning. Young voters, the very people who handed Labour their majority, are watching in disbelief. They voted for change, for transparency, for a government that would finally put their futures ahead of the same old establishment interests. They were sick of Tory chaos, of corruption and cover-ups, and they genuinely believed this time would be different. And now, just months into Labour's tenure, they're discovering that the new boss looks an awful lot like the old boss. The sense of betrayal among younger Britons is palpable. Scroll through TikTok, Instagram or X, and you'll see it everywhere. Thousands of young people posting with anger, sarcasm and pure exhaustion, not at one party, but at the whole system. Because what they're starting to believe, and who can blame them, is that every government lies, every promise is spin, and every party plays the same cynical game. This isn't just about one scandal or one policy. It's about an entire generation quietly checking out of traditional politics altogether, convinced that honesty simply doesn't exist in Westminster anymore. So where does that leave us? The ordinary British citizens who just want straight answers, affordable bills, and leaders who treat us like adults instead of statistics. We're left watching yet another political earthquake shaking the country in real time. And deep down, we know the truth. Even when this particular fight ends, the crisis of trust between the people and those who govern them will keep getting worse. Farage has landed a devastating blow. Starmer's team is reeling. The establishment media is in full-blown damage control. And tomorrow morning at 9 a.m, when Farage steps up to that podium and releases his next set of documents, we might learn that everything we've heard so far was just the tip of the iceberg. Because this isn't over. Not even close. In fact, it may just be getting started, and the British public, they're watching, they're waiting, and they're running out of patience with a political system that seems constitutionally incapable of telling them the truth.